Welcome to the deep dive.
Good to be here.
So today we're really getting into the weeds on the Redbank Valley School District's preliminary budget for 2025-2026.
Yeah, and it's quite a situation. We've got input from the interim superintendent, also a dissenting school board member, Kevin D. Johnson, and even some AI analysis.
Right, looking at their financial history and what might be coming.
And what really stands out, I think, is this clash of perspectives. On one hand, you hear about possible deficits, maybe needing tax hikes.
But then there's this other view.
Exactly. That the district's actually doing okay financially, but the budgeting process itself, maybe it's obscuring that.
Okay, so that's what we want to unpack for you today. Look at the arguments, the numbers, the whole picture, really.
Trying to cut through the jargon, what one source called potential propaganda, and get to the bottom of what's really going on with RVSD's finances.
We're drawing from the statement Superintendent Johnson, the AI, to give you that clear view.
So where should we start? Maybe with that comment from the interim superintendent. It really caught my eye.
Which one? Oh, the Kevin is not wrong part.
Yeah, that one. He sort of acknowledges Johnson's point, but then pivots immediately to say, we still need to disqualify some projected revenue and raise taxes. It's interesting.
It is a bit of a contradiction, isn't it? Like, you have a point, but we're going to proceed as planned anyway. So the official line seems to be extreme caution, leading to needing more tax money.
But Johnson's take is completely different. He voted no on this budget.
Why specifically?
He argues it just doesn't line up with the actual money coming in and going out based on past experience. He feels like year after year they see these big paper deficits.
Which then become the reason for asking taxpayers for more money.
Precisely. He actually used the term propaganda tool.
That's a strong phrase for a budget document. What's his core argument there?
It boils down to this. He thinks the budget isn't just a financial plan, but it's crafted to create a story of financial struggle.
To justify the tax increases he feels aren't needed.
That seems to be his position. He also brought up a practical point that the board doesn't get much time to really analyze everything before voting on the budget and taxes. He thinks the whole thing should start earlier.
Okay, so that sets the stage. And a huge part of this disagreement seems to circle around how they handle state funding. Specifically, the money that isn't, quote, guaranteed yet.
Yes, that's a major sticking point for Johnson, and the AI analysis really dives into this too.
The argument for excluding it is, well, if the state hasn't officially confirmed it, you can't count it, right? Sounds prudent on the surface.
It does, but the AI analysis points out something it calls the selective uncertainty principle.
Selective uncertainty principle. Okay, what does that mean in practice?
It means they seem to apply this caution, this uncertainty, very selectively. It's all focused on not counting certain revenues, mainly that state funding.
But not applying the same level of skepticism elsewhere.
Exactly. They don't seem to apply the same what if to, say, expense projections possibly being too high, or local revenue may be coming in better than expected, or even federal funds. It's like they're hyper-focused on the risk of state money not showing up.
But not the potential upsides or other uncertainties in the budget. It skews the picture.
That's the argument. And the AI brings historical data into it. It highlights that for years now, this uncertain state money has consistently shown up.
So the track record suggests it's actually pretty reliable, even if not officially guaranteed super early.
Right. So continuing to exclude it completely year after year, despite that history, well, it raises questions about the budgeting methodology itself.
Okay, so if they keep leaving out revenue that usually appears, what are the ripple effects? How does that feed into Johnson's propaganda claim?
Well, the AI analysis suggests several effects. First, it helps create what it terms a manufactured crisis narrative. By leaving out money that's likely to arrive, the budget automatically looks worse off than it probably is. This perceived crisis then makes asking for tax increases seem more necessary, more urgent.
Create the problem, then offer the solution. Got it.
Kind of. Then there's the one-way uncertainty bias. Uncertainty is only used as a reason to be pessimistic about revenue.
But not optimistic about, say, lower expenses.
Right, which leads to asymmetric information. The board and the public mainly see the downside risks, not a balanced picture of possibilities.
And they keep doing this year after year.
That's what the analysis calls repetition despite evidence. The method consistently leads to, arguably, inaccurate projections, but the practice continues.
The AI also mentioned a veneer of technocratic justification. How does that fit in?
It's about making the decision seem purely technical and cautious, rather than a policy choice. Saying it's not guaranteed sounds objective,
Yeah,
right?
it sounds responsible.
So it makes the push for higher taxes seem like a technical necessity, not just one possible option. And it shifts the burden of proof.
Yes, so.
Critics have to prove the money will come, instead of the administration having to justify excluding money that usually comes.
And that circular argument point.
Mhm.
When the money does show up later.
It's treated like a lucky break, a windfall. Not as evidence that the initial budget was too pessimistic, so the flawed projection method never really gets corrected.
It reinforces itself.
Exactly. And eventually this normalizes distortion. People just get used to seeing projected deficits and maybe accept tax increases more readily without questioning if the underlying projection was accurate.
Okay, so beyond the potential spin, are there actual, technical problems with budgeting this way?
The AI analysis points to a few. A big one is the failure to use probability-based forecasting. Instead of just saying guaranteed or not guaranteed, you'd look at how likely different revenue streams are. Assign probabilities, maybe say there's an 80% chance the state funding comes through, a 15% chance it's slightly less, 5% it's more, and plan around those likelihoods.
That sounds much more nuanced than just zeroing it out.
It is. The analysis also talks about the difference between being conservative versus accurate. A little caution is fine, maybe even good, but systematically leaving out large, historically reliable chunks of revenue, that goes beyond caution into, arguably, distorting reality.
And what about contingency funds? Don't they have reserves for unexpected problems?
They do, and that's the final technical point. They have budgetary reserves specifically for surprises. So if you're already setting aside money for unexpected shortfalls and you're also excluding likely revenue, well, it looks like you might be double counting the risk. Overly cautious, perhaps.
Right, planning for the same bad outcome in two different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So we've heard the arguments against excluding this money. But what does the data actually say about the chances of it showing up for 2025, 2026? This is where that AI probability assessment comes in, right?
Yes, and this part is fascinating. Based on RVSD's budget patterns over the last 3 years, plus the current political climate in Pennsylvania regarding education funding, the AI calculated probabilities for specific chunks of that excluded money.
Okay, break it down for us. What money are we talking about?
3 main items they looked at. First, the state adequacy supplement. That was about $324,000 last year, and it is in the governor's current proposal. The AI puts that at a 90% probability of coming through. Very likely.
90%. Okay, what else?
Second, potential cyber charter rate savings. This is linked to policy changes, maybe around $336,000. Because it depends on policy actually being enacted and implemented, the probability is lower, but still over half, 55%.
Still more likely than not. And the third?
PCCD grants from the PA Commission on Crime and Delinquency. About $120,000 last year. These are competitive grants, so naturally less certain, estimated at 60% probability.
So individually, most seem pretty likely, especially that big adequacy supplement. What about the chance of getting, the whole package?
Good question. When the AI weighted these probabilities by the dollar amounts, it came up with a 70.3% chance of the total excluded amount materializing.
Over 70%. That's significant.
But wait, there's more. The probability of at least half of that excluded money showing up is calculated at 89.2%. And the probability of some significant extra funding coming in, a huge 98.3%.
Wow. So it's almost certain some extra money will materialize, and highly likely that a lot of it will.
That's what the historical data and current factors suggest, according to this analysis. And there are other factors, too. Like local revenue. Historically, the district's estimates have been conservative. The AI sees a 95% chance they'll bring in more than budgeted locally, maybe around $110,000 extra.
Okay.
And then there's that budgetary reserve fund, $250,000 set aside for 25-26. They usually don't spend all of it. The AI estimates an 85% chance that, again, some or all of that reserve won't actually be needed.
So let's put all that together. The likely state money, the probable extra local money, the reserve likely untouched.
Yeah.
What's the bottom line?
The AI's final assessment is an 87% probability that enough additional funding and savings will materialize to substantially reduce or maybe even completely wipe out that projected $1.3 million deficit.
87% chance of significantly reducing or eliminating the deficit. That strongly points towards potentially a balanced budget or even a surplus, doesn't it?
It certainly leans that way based on this probability analysis.
And there was one more piece of evidence Kevin Johnson mentioned. The district using current year funds, 24-25 funds, for next year's expenses. like paving and curriculum.
Yes, that's a really telling detail. If you're using this year's money to prepay for next year's projects, it strongly suggests you're not strapped for cash right now.
It implies there's likely a surplus in the current budget year, 2024-2025.
Exactly. Which again supports the argument that the projected deficit for the next year might be, let's say, overly pessimistic.
Okay. So wrapping this up, this deep dive shows these two really contrasting narratives about the RVSD budget. You've got the official picture emphasizing caution, potential shortfalls, justifying maybe tax increases.
Based largely on excluding that unguaranteed state revenue.
And then you have the counter narrative, backed by Johnson and this AI analysis, looking at historical trends and probabilities, arguing the district is probably in much better shape.
Suggesting a consistent pattern of under-promising on revenue and maybe overestimating expenses.
Yeah, the whole thing really hinges on how you treat that state money and whether the budget process is reflecting reality or, well, something else.
Is it genuine caution, or is it a tool to achieve a certain outcome? That seems to be the core question.
It definitely leaves you wondering, if there's such a high probability, based on past performance, that more money will come in, and they likely have surpluses, what does it mean if the budget process consistently cries wolf about deficits?
And potentially leads to tax hikes that might not be strictly necessary based on the most probable financial outcome.
Exactly. What questions should people in the Redbank Valley community be asking about how these numbers are put together and how the financial story is told? Something to think about.
Definitely food for thought.
Thanks for digging into this with us today.